Hello, everybody. Now, the case of Lucy Letby continues to be something that I find incredibly disturbing. I believe that this is likely to be one of the worst miscarriages of justice that's ever happened in English history. Of course, we know that a jury convicted her on 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. But we also know now that much of the evidence that they were given was twisted and skewed, and they weren't given the full evidence. And this is coming out in something called the Thirlwall inquiry. Now, this was set up to look at what happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital. And the terms of the inquiry are not about questioning the convictions, which I think they should be, but actually the judge there, someone called Lady Justice Thirlwall, is in charge of this inquiry, is completely ruled out looking into the convictions. She's not going to go there at all. Interesting, because this seems to be like the people in the justice system protecting the justice system. They can't have anything harming the reputation of British justice, even though it's shot to pieces already. And I think it further will be when finally they're forced to admit that this was a wrongful conviction. But the Thirlwall inquiry's terms of operation, what they're looking at is just simply to question, is there anything that the NHS could have done to prevent these deaths from happening earlier, to prevent more deaths happening? Well, the answer is obvious to anyone who is looking at this with an open mind, who is a critical thinker, in that the evidence was not all given to the jury, and a couple of obvious and big pieces of evidence which were blown up in the media that they've used to propagandize against Lucy Letby was, one, the supposed confession on some notes that she'd written. And on one of the notes it says, "I am evil, I did this." But that doesn't take into account on other notes it says, "I didn't do this, I haven't done anything wrong." But that's not presented to us. It's only something on these notes. And there were dozens, hundreds of pages of notes that she scribbled down over the period after these babies died in the hospital, and then she was arrested, and then she was questioned and imprisoned, held on remand for years before the trial, and then convicted. And then there was this horrible outpouring of hate towards her that I remember when the verdict came back in the summer of 2023. And, what was very disturbing to me, especially, is some people I know personally in the media joined in the outpouring of hate towards her. But these notes, we now find out, were written on the advice of a therapist, a counsellor. She was obviously a young woman in great distress because she'd been accused of mass murder, and she was seeing a counsellor who advised her to write down her thoughts on a piece of paper. This wasn't a confession at all, which is what is being presented to us and to the jury. It was just, a stream of consciousness which she wrote down at the suggestion of a counsellor to cope with her feelings. So this can't be taken as any kind of evidence of a confession. It has to be completely discarded. It wouldn't be admissible as evidence, in any reasonable court of law, because it wasn't a confession. But in this case, the judge said, "Oh no, you can present it as evidence against it," and it became one of the central things that people point at to show that she's guilty, and it is complete nonsense. The other thing which has come to be of central importance in the trial when it happened was the dodgy spreadsheet, and I pointed this out at the time. And people have seen all over most media channels at the time. There was a spreadsheet created that showed the 23 or so incidents which were being tried, and Lucy Letby was the president, every single one of them, and the other nurses around were not present, any more than half of them. So this was supposedly the smoking gun to show that it was her. But of course, what I pointed out at the time, what many other people had pointed out at the time, but we were basically ignored by most of the mainstream media, they're not ignoring it now, by the way, is that there weren't just 7 deaths of babies, there were 17 deaths that occurred in the period that they were looking into between 2015 and 2016. This sort of 12 to 15 month period, there were 17 babies died. And so Lucy Letby was present at 8 times out of 17. And now we hear there was also a doctor that was present at the same times that Lucy Letby was present. And the doctors initially appeared on the spreadsheet with the nurses, but when it went to evidence, when it went to the court, all the doctors were removed. So there was another potential suspect, even if you were looking at just those 7 incidents that went to the court. That Lucy Letby was not the only person who was present at all 7 times. There was another doctor who was there as well for those times, but they were removed from the spreadsheet because they only kept the nurses on there, not the doctors. But if you had a spreadsheet showing all of the incidents of babies dying tragically in that neonatal unit, of course, most of them are incredibly premature, where the survival rate is much lower than for a normal baby that is born at 39 weeks. If you're born at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 weeks, your chances of survival you go down. But there were 17 of those incidents of babies dying, and over that period of time, Lucy Letby was only present at 8 of them. They only looked at 7 of them in the court, and there would have been other nurses that would have been present, probably also 7, 8, maybe 9, 10 times. We don't know because we haven't got a proper spreadsheet which would be unbiased to show who was present, nurses and doctors, at all 17 times where a baby died, or the other events where there was a serious incident, a health crash that the baby survived from, but may have caused death if there hadn't been an intervention. We simply don't know. So the spreadsheet is dodgy as hell. And, this is something that really frustrates me, having a science background, being involved in politics and media, and then looking at court cases. People present evidence that is blatantly, dodgy, blatantly deceptive. Another example of this is the figures about COVID, Professor Ferguson's dodgy modelling for COVID. We mentioned that in many, many times in other videos. Climate modelling, it's all based on modelling rather than empirical observations. And in observations, you have to put down every data point so that people can see, so that your data is transparent and people can see that you haven't left anything out and you haven't said, oh, we don't like those data points because they don't fit the conclusion that we want. So we're only going to use these data points and use them to come to a predetermined conclusion. And this looks like what's happened in the Lucy Letby case. So, as one person commented recently, this looks, less and less like even a miscarriage of justice, but actually a perversion of the course of justice where they've set her up as a patsy to cover up something else, whether it's, incompetence by a doctor, who is higher up the food chain than her and needs to be protected because he's in the club, of whatever club that is, or to protect the NHS's reputation. And now, obviously, they've made this ruling in the jury. I'm sure that they acted on the instructions of the judge, and the judge there allowed majority verdicts to be used as to convict, whereas rather than unanimous verdicts, and that is entirely at the discretion of the judge. There were only 3 counts out of the 24 on trial that were unanimous. The others, where she was found guilty, 11 of the 14 counts that she was found guilty on, were majority verdicts. So there were, 1 or maybe 2 members of the jury that disagreed and gave a minority opinion, but that was overruled because the judge said, we're going to allow majority verdicts to convict. Otherwise, there would have only been 3 convictions, and then if they'd have had the full evidence about the notes that she wrote at the behest of a counsellor and the full spreadsheet showing all of the incidents where babies died or had health crashes, if I were on the jury, I would have acquitted her. The case, there would have been absolutely no case to answer to, basically. And all of the other evidence we know is circumstantial. Even the things which they say, oh, this is scientific proof, but it's not. And one of the most quoted and the piece of evidence that they say sounds like the strongest was that one of the babies had a high insulin level according to a test that had been done. But I pointed this out a year ago, that this insulin test was not done up to a forensic standard, and it came back from a non-forensic laboratory. And it said, oh, possibly there's, this insulin's high. If they wanted to check up to a forensic standard, what they should have done is then taken the sample, then send it off to another lab and come back with a forensic level test, which is a different test to use, which would then have been admissible in court. So basically all the evidence about insulin levels being high in one of the babies was not up to a forensic standard and should have also been thrown out as evidence that is not admissible to use because it's not of the correct standard. It's absolutely unbelievable what they've done here and how they've come to a conclusion, it seems, and then tried to get everything to fit the conclusion rather than trying to find out what is the truth. 17 babies died in the Countess of Chester Hospital over a 15-month period. Is that unusual? Is that really a high spike? If so, is it just on the above average level, or is it a spike which is beyond anything that's ever happened before ever in the country? Well, no, it's not, because there are other neonatal units and hospitals where there have been similar levels of babies dying in a similar time frame. Not common, but there are. I mean, there have been some other places where there have been 10 to 20 deaths of neonates in a period of a year or two. So it's not, it's high, but it's not out of the ordinary, as though this is something that's never ever happened before. And the thing is here, I was brought up to believe in British justice and the fairness of the police and the prosecution service and the justice system, and that what people who are working in those systems would be doing always is to find the truth. But it's really shocking to realize that actually that's not what they're doing. A lot of them are not interested in the truth. They're just interested in pinning something off someone and locking them up, whether they're guilty or not. And we've had so many miscarriages of justice in this country. And just before the conviction of Lucy Letby, Andrew Malkinson was set free after being in prison for 17 years, falsely accused of rape, and the police sat on some evidence. And they were not interested in the truth. They could have, said, we've got the evidence here that shows that he's not guilty, but they didn't. And there's other people, too many to mention, that they've known. They could have exonerated them and not taken someone to court because they know that they're not guilty, but they've tried to pin someone as guilty anyway. Why? It doesn't make any sense to me to do that. Because if someone's not guilty, they should be exonerated immediately. I don't understand why this is happening. I can only look at this and see, well, there are some people who are working in the system who are not like me, who are not like us, who are evil, and who will put someone innocent in prison because they are evil and they thrive on misery. And there are others who say, well, we got to find a conviction because we've got to think about the families of the children who died, and we're thinking of them. And yes, obviously they're in a dreadful state because they've lost their children. But the thing is, what is the best for them is to find the truth, not to pin something on someone, which isn't true. And, I know not everyone agrees with me on this. I think that this is a wrongful conviction. I know not everyone agrees. And obviously people in the establishment, media, government, and judiciary would strongly disagree with me, I'm sure, because they want to protect the system that they're working in. But as I said, that the system's reputation is shot to pieces, and as time goes on, is every day a new revelation is coming out, a new piece of information to show that the evidence presented in that trial is deceptive and twisted. And it's only a matter of time. The question is, when will people admit that a mistake has been made, and either have a retrial, not an appeal, because in an appeal you can only present the same evidence that was presented in the original trial, which we now know is vastly flawed. But there needs to be either a retrial with all of this new information that we have. The dodgy spreadsheet is wrong. That's got to go. It's got to show everybody who died at that time. It was a baby. The confession notes, you can show them, but you can also show that this is a woman in distress, and they were all written at the behest of a counsellor, a therapist, and the door swipe evidence which was used by the Crown Prosecution Service. We now know that was wrong. They've admitted that it was wrong. They presented wrong evidence. So if wrong evidence, incorrect evidence at the admittance of the Crown Prosecution Service was used in the trial, surely there must be a retrial with the evidence that is correct. And that's got to be admitted now, because every day that goes on, potentially, and I think, 99% certain that there is an innocent woman in jail, Lucy Letby, and she shouldn't be there for a day longer. This is exactly the same situation as the Dutch nurse, Lucia de Burke, who went through the same thing, false accusation, wrong statistical evidence that was deceptive. It was found out that this evidence was wrong, and then she was the conviction was quashed and she was set free. But she was in prison for 7 years, and Lucy Letby's already been in prison for 6 years since she was first arrested in 2018. So I hope she's out before 7 years, because this is a travesty of justice, in my opinion. And of course, not everyone will agree with that. And we have free speech in this country. Well, free speech is a fundamental freedom I know the government we got at the moment is trying to take it away, but until they do, I'm going to keep on using my free speech to say what I think is the truth, because that's all I'm concerned with, what is true. And if an innocent woman is in prison, she shouldn't be, and she should be let out right now. Free Lucy.